are concerned, all of us non-Christians are just joining in to herald the birth of their Prince of Peace. The only thing that might shake their confidence would be if more non-Christians, us included, just said no to their festival. Imagine if all the atheists and humanists and freethinkers and all the believers whose faith happens not to be Christianity insisted on going to work and clamored for stores and schools and government offices to be open to us for business as usual every December 25th. What a mixed message we send when we observe the Christian's holiday, or when we keep our solstice or our human light. If we do anything at this time of year but make ourselves very visible as non-participants, how can we blame any Christian observer for concluding that we are just hypocrites and what we have to say can be ignored? Christmas remains what it is, what it has been ever since its relatively recent reanimation. A festival too narrowly Christian, too constrictively Anglo, too obstinately white bread to meet the needs of a culture that grows ever more diverse. That remains true no matter how many of our Yuletide traditions are historically pagan. That remains true no matter how many of our Yuletide traditions are actually synthetic, recent inventions swabbed in swaddling clothes of false nostalgia. One day, I firmly believe, American society will catch up with its own diversity. One day, popular wisdom will recognize how inappropriate it is that a single faith holds special claim over the last 6 weeks of every calendar year. Expecting everyone to join the Christian's birthday party will be deplored for what it is, unacceptable arrogance. When this worm finally turns, how will we, atheists, secular humanists, agnostics, freethinkers, how will we be seen? Will we be seen as people who stood against this retrograde holiday observance, who stood for diversity, for consistency, for historical honesty? Or will we be seen as people who slept with the enemy, who went along and passed and kept our solstices and our human life and left the hard, necessary work of fighting for reform to others? I know where I stand. Ho, 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 no, no, no. As to where you stand, that is your decision. Look into your heads, look into your hearts, and ask yourself where you should stand at holiday time next year. And here, Santa didn't bring me any more slides. Thank you.
And they always decorated it up. And the conservative Jewish people get upset and bring their giant-sized menorah and stand it next to it. So I'm trying to think, so we should probably go there and dance around the things and come up with our chant, ho, 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 no, 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 undecorate the tree and take your menorah away, please. We'd have to say please because we're Midwest and we're always...
Well, again, this is true. This is true. Try that and let me know how it works. Actually, about 10 years ago, the Council for Secular Humanism local group in Cincinnati came up with a really nifty way of doing that. They had an open forum that broke out on Cincinnati's Fountain Square, and it got rather peculiar. First there was the Christmas tree, and then a ultra-conservative Jewish group insisted on a menorah, and then the Ku Klux Klan insisted on a cross. And somewhere in here, the Free Inquiry Group of Cincinnati in northern Kentucky bought a Jersey barrier. You know, one of those big, they didn't get concrete one, they got one of the plastic ones that you take where you're going to go and then fill it with water. And they painted it as the wall of separation, with quotations from the First Amendment and Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists on it. was a feature in Fountain Square for 3 or 4 years. They had some success with it. That's another possibility. But the thing that concerns me here is that the superficial things we do, even when we're having our alternative holidays. I mean, you know, you have Christmas trees on you have a Christmas tree in your window, and you have lights on your roof, and well, maybe you know that they're only blue and gold lights, so you're celebrating the Day of Reason or some such. But Christians don't register that. They just see your home endorsing what the majority is doing, and I think that's a big problem. Yes, in the back.
I think Christmas is just as innocuous as Halloween. I mean, you know, Halloween is a fun holiday.
That's full of Satanism. Where have you been?
Well, I mean, you know, and another thing, I got 3 things here that's bugging me about this whole thing. The other one is that children don't intellectualize like that, like you were, you know, they don't do that. They just say, oh, Santa Claus, yay, you know.
Well,
I remember when I was a kid, you know,
I have some child psychologists who disagree with you on that. And I mean, they didn't sit the kids down and ask them. They, asked them to put various figures into categories and, play with blocks and other ways they had to try and get at what the kids were thinking.
And the third thing, and last thing, was that you mentioned Christmas was not celebrated in the English-speaking world from 1790 to 1820.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true, because George Washington celebrated Christmas during that period. There was they mentioned Christmas. I read several biographies of Thomas Jefferson. They celebrated Christmas at Monticello in the late 18th century and early 19th century. So,
I think with Washington and Jefferson, I'm sure there were individual celebrations that lasted a little bit longer. But with Washington and Jefferson, I think most of that you're talking about was more in the 1780s.
No, they mentioned at Monticello during the time when Jefferson was the sage of Monticello, and he had people visiting him at Christmas time in the early 19th century. He died in 1826,
mm-hmm.
And in that period, right after his presidency in 1809, when he was his last year, they celebrated Christmas at Monticello. They certainly did.
Well, I would have to question, at least in some cases, some of those references may simply have been to Christmas time as a period of the year. And there may, over here in the former colonies, there may have been a little Christmas celebrating going on, but it was, by all records, it was quite sparse. And the holiday, by 1820, the holiday as a majority public celebration was pretty much flatlined on both sides of the Atlantic, at least according to my sources.
What was the reason for not celebrating from 1790 to 1820? What was the reason for that?
No one's entirely sure. Some of it seems to have been, as I mentioned, lingering damage to the holiday from the Puritan period. For example, the Puritans, of course, a lot of Puritans came over here and largely ran New England for a long period, and were prominent in New England long after the Puritans were out of power in England. And so, for example, the Boston public schools didn't close on Christmas Day until sometime in the 1850s. In fact, there were a bunch of records. Charles Dickens, after the Christmas Carol came out, did a U.S. tour where he would get up on stage for like 4 hours and read the whole Christmas Carol. And apparently his stops in New England had an electrifying effect on these flinty old Puritans who hadn't been observing the holiday. There are surviving letters, for example, from a Puritan factory owner who had kept his factory open every December 25th, as was very common in New England, until he heard Dickens read the Christmas Carol, and that year he went back home and ordained that his factory would close on Christmas. And that was apparently a fairly common event, so New England was very strong, both informally and officially, in ignoring the holiday until that specific event, until Charles Dickens read in Boston. It is one of those phenomenal historical weirdnesses.
It was the same for Congress.
Pardon?
Our government met on Christmas Day right up until right around that time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think Congress met on Christmas Day. Every day Christmas fell on a weekday until like 1835, something like that. But to go back to your first point, I think Christmas is a bigger deal in some significant ways than Halloween. I mean, Halloween, you know, you see a lot of signs up from a lot of advertising from the stores selling costumes. But certainly in terms of the cultural impact, the degree to which it dominates anything else in our cultural life, the number of days for which it does so, there's nothing like Christmas. Christmas is the biggest holiday season in the entire year, and unfortunately, and unavoidably, in spite of all of its non-Christian content, it affirms Christian hegemony over this culture. And again, I think that's a problem we need to be more cognizant of. Anybody else? Yes?
What are some of your favorite holidays that you do celebrate if you don't celebrate Christmas?
Well, let's see. I rather like the 4th of July. Those founders were good Enlightenment thinkers. Actually, I do most of the public holidays. You know, Labor Day, Flag Day, what have you. I do New Year's. I don't pay a great deal of attention to Thanksgiving, not having much to thank. I've reached an age at which nobody really thinks too much of the fact that I don't do a lot about Halloween. And my wife would kill me if I ever forgot Valentine's Day.
But New Year's is an arbitrary point in time. I mean, you could say the New Year starts July 1st or something.
I could.
They base it on Christ's birth, so Christmas should be on New Year's.
Or Christmas could be on the solstice. I mean, the solstice actually fell on December 25th until the adoption of the Gregorian calendar. When there were gaps of several days, there were errors in calendar calculation, and we wound up with things falling on different days. And that was the first time that the solstice was the 21st and Christmas was the 25th. Yes?
What do Christians say about the mismatching genealogies between Matthew and Luke?
As little as possible. No, actually, the typical dodge is that apologists will say that one of the genealogies is a genealogy through Joseph, and the other one is the genealogy through Mary. Now, there's no reason to think this is so, starting with the fact that going right back to the earliest extant texts of both Matthew and Luke, the text says, here's the genealogy through Joseph. And it takes a certain amount of intestinal fortitude to be able to point to one or the other. And by the way, apologists disagree as to which is which. And say, oh, this is the one through Mary. And actually, this is a, you know, it's kind of funny now, but I mean, this was a serious theological problem for some Christians. Well-known 19th century figure Andrew Dixon White, who became the co-founder of Cornell University, first abandoned his orthodoxy and became a liberal religious thinker who would eventually write the most influential book on the warfare of science with theology. What got him doubting? The errors in the genealogies in Matthew and Luke. That was the banana peel that he first stepped on. So this is, I mean, at one level, it's a very serious problem with the New Testament. Theologians have attempted to wrestle with it. Most of them writing for popular audiences have just tried this really transparent dodge.
They trace it all the way back to Adam.
Yeah, well, they could. But, you know, the amazing thing with that is that it does show us, you know, it does allow us to read these dynamics of what was going on in early Christianity. Because the more clear you look at it, it's just, you know, there's nothing in the God-man born of a virgin story that is supported by the Messiah materials. There's nothing in the Messiah